I'd like to welcome to the JPP Maayan Aviv, who is the CEO of American Friends of NATAL. NATAL is based in Israel. It's a non-for-profit organization founded 25 years ago. The organization specializes in the field of war and terror-related trauma, PTSD, and resiliency building among civil society. No need for me to comment how crucial this work is in the current milieu. American Friends of NATAL supports efforts in Israel. It also engages in innovative collaborations, partnering with U.S. organizations who seek NATAL's expertise in the field of trauma, preparedness, and recovery. For example, work is being done in Chicago and Ukraine. Maayan Aviv, our guest this morning, is the CEO of AFN, which is American Friends of NATAL. She served in the IDF, and she's dedicated her life to nonprofits. She's going to talk to us about the incredible work she's engaged in right now, and she's also going to share with us a little bit of her history in not-for-profit. So Maayan, without further ado, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure, my pleasure. So I always do this to my guests. It's a little bit unfair because I just gave kind of like a formal introduction of your resume, your bio, but I always like to throw it back at my guests. Please share in your own words who you are.
In my own words, I am a mother, a wife, a daughter, a friend, a runner, a yogi, a big Peloton fan, and the executive director, CEO of American Friends of NATAL in my professional life, which many times takes over your personal life, part of the job.
Sure. So I'd imagine, I'm guessing that you grew up in Israel, but maybe I have that wrong. So tell me if that's accurate or not.
So I was fortunate to grow up both in Israel and in the US. I was born in the US and we moved back to Israel when I was a baby. We lived in a yishuv, which is a very small town in the Galil. And around elementary school, we moved back to the US to New Jersey, and I finished middle school in the US, moved back to Israel. So I did high school and the army in Israel. And I think it plays a huge role into who I am because I really have the flexibility and the ability to adapt to both cultures equally. And I understand, and I think that plays a huge role in my professional life as well.
Fascinating. If I could ask just a little bit, I'm just curious kind of what was going on in your parents' lives that they were going back and forth so frequently, if I could ask.
Of course. So early in the 80s, my parents were here on a government mission for the Israeli government. We were in New York. And then my dad is a medical engineer. So he was relocated here in the 90s. That's when we moved back. When we moved back to Israel, it was because my sister was going into the army and my parents did not want her to be a lone soldier.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep.
How many children are you? How many siblings?
I'm a middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother.
Interesting. Okay. So tell us a little bit about your Army experience. For better or worse, we're all always cognizant of the amazing work of the IDF, but not as cognizant as we've been since October 7th. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your own experience serving in the IDF.
The IDF service, my service was challenging, but life-changing through experiences. I think for me, I served in the intelligence force. I was in the Unit 8200. I was an officer for a year. At the end of my service, I did a little bit of international relations. So it was less in the field and more of the overview of the IDF. I got to meet people I wouldn't you don't meet in your circle of friends. It really takes, in the initial service, it was 3 weeks. You go through tironut, which is initial training, and your group with 50 other girls that, besides being the same age as you, we have nothing in common. So it's just interesting, and to see how in such a short period of time these women, girls at the time, they become your friend, your sister, your confidant, your mentor at some point. And it's about the people, what I've learned in the IDF. I don't know how it is now, but back in my time, there was a lot of pride around going and serving, and have friends who went to combat units that it had a very challenging experience getting accepted into. So I think I would say it was a proud moment for 18-year-old me to be in the Army, to feel important, to be taught practical skills, and to interact with a variety of people.
Fascinating. I'm curious just how it works in terms of, so going into into intelligence, into the 8200 unit, which is very prominent. That was something that you were you knew going in that's what you were going to be doing, or there was kind of like a pregame to that. How does that work in terms of that? That was, yeah.
So I believe it's 16-year-old gets a letter from Lishkat Giyus, from the IDF, saying you are going to be going into the Army in 2 years, and they start calling you in for testing. I mean, I'm guessing it's IQ testing. I didn't want to go to the intelligence force. I wanted to be, something in the combat, in the field with soldiers, training, teaching. That's what all my friends were doing. But every single test came back and said, you're going to the intelligence force, you're going to the intelligence force. So the day of my drafting, I knew that's where I was headed to. But the training, the initial one is for everybody. So a lot of some of the women I met went with me later for the intelligence force training, and some of them, we separated ways. But that's pretty much how it works. You go in and
Right.
which unit you're going into.
How long did you serve in 8200?
So back in my time, mandatory service was 1 year, 9 months, and I served for 3. I was an officer, so I served an extra a little bit over a year. It was just fascinating, the transition from being a soldier in Sadir, in routine, and then being an officer in extended services, and especially for women. It wasn't something that was very prominently seen in the IDF. So it was a big accomplishment for me to go through that.
Fascinating. I don't want to get too bogged down in this, although I do have some more questions. Maybe we'll come back to later, but I do have some interest, particularly now, kind of with the intelligence failures, sadly, around October 7th. I'm sure there's what to talk about here, but let's put this aside. I'll come back to it. But let's pivot a little bit forward in terms of, okay, so you're coming out of the Army now. You've had a transformational experience. You've exhibited, leadership skills. I'm curious, kind of, what were your thoughts then? I imagine many people who were in your shoes would have maybe gone into for-profit. Tech sector in Israel is robust. I'm sure you had many opportunities in front of you. What kind of, maybe you did start in that direction, I'm not sure, but what kind of made you think about the not-for-profit space?
So I left the Army and I signed up for the Hebrew University. And I told my parents I'm going over the summer to visit my friends in the US. And you have to remember, this was early 2000s, and there were a lot of suicide bombings in Israel at the time, and terror was sort of really in the day-to-day life. And I came here to spend time with my friends, and the ease of being here just made me very comfortable. And I decided that I would stay here. My mother said, just make sure you get an education. And I did. But, this is interesting. I had this conversation last night, but as Israelis, we grow up secular. I grew up secular, and we never had to prove that we're Jewish or prove our Judaism. It was never a question. And then, when you come here, when you live here, being Jewish has so many meanings, Orthodox, Reform, so many meanings. And as an Israeli, it's hard to identify with one group because to me, everybody's Jewish. You're Jewish at your own comfort level. And so after school here, I did know that, my passion has been and always was Israel and supporting Israel. And I knew I wanted to stay in that world where whatever I do benefited Israel or had me working with Israel. I can't say I was looking for nonprofits specifically, but during school, I worked at the Claims Conference, which is another Jewish nonprofit. And I really enjoyed both the work, the people, and the meaning that it gave me. Going home, the computer shut down, but you made an impact on one person's life. And so I graduated college and I started looking for a job. And the first place I went to was jewishjobs.com. That was my calling. And, very short story. It was not a long story, but I applied for American Friends of NATAL Hospital and got the job as a database financial administrator. So it was really about seeing nonprofit from A to Z, from the bottom up all the way. And I worked there for 12 years. And probably around year 12, I started asking myself, what can I do? What do I do good? And really took myself through a process with a woman who specializes in, occupational support. And literally, it was almost a flashback to my Army service. Every single test came back saying, CEO nonprofit, work with meaning. And after that, I knew I was in the right place, and that this is my industry. I love working with people who are passionate about a mission, especially when it has to do with Israel. And I really find that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
So interesting. I think I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you have a degree or you did some education in the fundraising space. Is that accurate? Did you?
Yeah, I took a fabulous course at NYU. The professor was really incredible. All of them about it was fundraising professionals. The one course I found the most fascinating was managing your board. That really the biggest takeaways have been from that specific course.
Do you mind? It's an important topic. If you don't mind, it's obviously you can't say over
Absolutely.
Did I get a few pointers on managing up? I'd love to hear a little bit.
So my perspective is different. The class started with everyone asked, the teacher asked, how many of you executive directors are frustrated with your boards? And everybody raised their hand, and I did not. And so she called on me and she said, why aren't you frustrated? And I said, because board members are volunteers. They are giving you their time, their skill, their expertise. You can't be frustrated with someone, doing good for you. You have to be flexible and adapt. And I think my biggest takeaway from that specific course was, people are people and they wear different hats. And as a leader within an organization, you have to learn how to work with your board members and not the other way around. So it's managing expectations plays a big role, and communicating, but also make yourself available. I think, you have to go the extra mile because these are your volunteers. And, I think their relationship is reciprocated that way.
Very profound. I like what you're saying a lot. Do you have any insights in terms of building boards, in terms of recruiting volunteers, who you should recruit, who you shouldn't recruit?
You shouldn't recruit anyone who doesn't support your mission.
Right, but what does that mean? Financially support, conceptually support? What does that mean? No. I mean, I can't imagine having someone on the board who doesn't care about the mission theory, right? So the question is,
No, I know. Look, a board member doesn't always have to give financial support. It's not about that. I think a board member needs to know what they can bring to the table. So whether it's a lawyer who can offer you, looking through the organization's contracts, giving that kind of support, great. If it's someone who's great with strategies, I think the role of the executive director is to get to know the people who support your organization and figure out what they can bring to the table. Recruiting a new board is hard. It is challenging. I recently added a new board member, and it was a process because both sides need to get to know each other. These are, again, volunteers. These are people who work for the organization, but they're not really working in the sense of, they don't have deadlines. They don't have, it's not their day job. And so you have to be able to balance that enough and get to know the people and understand what they can bring, realistically, be very realistic about it.
Mhm. Makes a lot of sense. If I understood you correctly, before we get into the important work that Natal is doing, and we'll get there in a second. So you were at Alin for 12 years. It sounded like, quote unquote, you began at the, let's say, in the colloquial mailroom in the data center. I think you concluded as CEO. So maybe just explain to me what that trajectory was, moving through an organization from bottom up.
When I started, about a month into my work there, I said, I want to see a full circle of what happens with from the second the check comes in, how do we treat the donor? What do we do with the donation? And I probably spent 5 years doing various jobs within the organization until I was promoted to the deputy executive director. I believe small nonprofits, especially the ones that I've seen, require a team that really everybody needs to know how to fill in, how to step in when someone is unavailable or needs extra support. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to learn all of the different roles within the organization, and not in a short period of time. It's really important to be able to see, economic cycles and trends in philanthropy and in fundraising, political situations around the world that impact what fundraising looks like and what events look like. So any experience is a great one. It could be the greatest experience and the greatest success or the greatest failure, but I owned up to it and learned from it.
I like what you're saying a lot, because I think back in terms of my own experience at a not-for-profit for almost a decade now, and you do think about the different cycles, whether it was during COVID, whether it was at the beginning of post-October 7th, if you weren't in a space that was directly supporting Israel, like, you definitely do see, thankfully, I haven't been in this space in a severe economic downturn, but I imagine that could be incredibly challenging as well. So it's very insightful. So how long were you actually the executive director or the CEO yourself? How long at Alin? How long did you have that role for?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
I think. Okay. And then I don't know if I got it. You said you went to speak to a career coach at that point. I'm curious kind of what was the kind of evolution of transitioning from that role to the role you're in right now? And then we'll jump into that role, obviously.
So Natal was a calling for me. I had met their leadership by, through a friend, not looking for work. They were interested, in learning about what the role of an executive director in an American Friends of was doing. And at the time at Alin, we were about to have our 20th anniversary bike ride. So I loved my job, and I had the best supportive board, and, again, over a decade's worth of knowing people really intimately. And I wasn't looking for any other work, but I have known Natal as an organization since I was discharged from the Army and given it as a resource, and have read about it, and I'm very aware about, you know, the mental health stigmas in Israel specifically. And I said no, but I stayed in touch with them, and it sort of happened, you know, when the stars align and you feel ready. It was more about feeling ready. You know, who wants to leave work where you're appreciated, where your voice matters, where you've established yourself. Um, but I think in life you have to take a leap sometimes and see where you can do good in other places.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let's jump in. So tell us. I think you've only been at Natal now for a year or two, if I'm not mistaken. And how long have you been?
About a year and a half, 18 months.
Wow, 18 months. Okay, and I'm guessing. So we'll do the math. About 10 of those. So you had a little bit of a runway to get comfortable before events of October 7th. So why don't you clue us in terms of what pre-October 7th was, and then you'll tell us a little bit about what you've been dealing with. I can't even imagine what you've been dealing with in the last 10 months.
Um, Pre-October 7th, and my biggest challenge going into this position was that
Was
people
this the
really
first,
didn't
my
know.
understanding, sorry to interrupt. My understanding is you're the initial person in this role, or there was somebody you were replacing?
No, they've had several executive directors with a very small operations. The organization was founded 20 years ago, so it's a very established nonprofit. It was very small in terms of the number of supporters, and foundations and federations, but it's been there. People know the name Natal. They understand what we do. Those who knew us. The biggest challenge prior to October 7th was to, and I knew this going into the job, that how do you explain mental, you know, a mental injury, right? An invisible wound to society that not only doesn't see it, but doesn't necessarily want to see it. It's, you know, mental health has its stigmas around the world. And then when you're dealing with mental health that comes from trauma related to war and terror, that's a big, heavy topic to be bringing into a room, when you're trying to talk to potential supporters or donors. So I knew that was a big challenge. I would say pre-October 7th, my focus was on learning the organization, introducing and getting to know the partners that we already had prior to October 7th, and thinking, you know, how do we raise awareness about this topic, this very important topic? And on October 6th, you know, the conversation was around, let's showcase some veterans from the Yom Kippur War, so 50 years ago, who are coping with PTSD today and can really show what Natal has done for them, not only personally, but also on a society level where they destigmatize mental health. So that was October 6th. October 7th, and you know, like many, I will never forget that day, that morning, how it evolved. For me, everything about Natal clicked on October 7th in the morning. What they were doing before, what Jude Recanati, the founder of Natal, envisioned 26 years ago, it was really about, it clicked, the language, the understanding of the important work that this organization will do today, but will continue to do in 10, 15, 25 years, because that work is necessary. Was a huge, meaningful moment for me. October 7th changed the way donors think about us, think about Natal, because they know, now they know what national trauma means. Now they've felt what trauma related to war and terror feels like, and how it made them feel a week to a month into this, 6 months into this, and we're still going. And having that basic understanding from everyone made my job, I don't want to say easier because it's the wrong word, but less challenging in the sense that people wanted to listen. It wasn't a topic that people wanted to ignore, or, it wasn't the elephant in the room. It was just something that everybody wanted to understand what, quote unquote, what Israel is going to be doing with 10 million civilians who have been exposed to national trauma.
Wow. I'm curious. I have two questions for you. I have many questions for you, but two questions. One is, I've noticed in my peripheral following of the war, or reading about things, that there's certainly, I'm just picking an example, like FIDF, I think I saw somewhere, was like raised some really impressive amount of money to launch some sort of mental health rehab facility in Israel, if I'm not mistaken. So my question is, A, like, there must be others in the space now, or jumping into the space, or even United Hatzalah, I think, like, you see the big organizations who were doing their thing seem to be expanding into the space. That's A. And B, I'm just curious, a similar question, like, do people see this as helping soldiers get their equipment? Like, is this on par in people's minds with needs for the war, or is it viewed like there's all different hierarchies of how people give even to the war efforts? I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two things. And I'm sure it's complicated. I'm just like,
no, it's actually, it's not.
Okay.
I'll simplify it. FIDF is the body that treats soldiers that are in active service. So their PTSD center, which is, an incredible initiative, is specifically for soldiers coming out of the combat field. And those same soldiers, when they are released from the army, their dedicated call line is operated by NATAL. So the point is, all of these organizations are bigger, greater, and better working together. And, NATAL is unique because it treats civilians, veterans, it treats all circles of trauma. And what do I mean by that? Where could you find a support group for grandparents, a support group for siblings? There's, the person who experienced the trauma, and that person, their circle of support also needs support. So NATAL also advises to many other organizations. I would say at this point, and that's probably an outcome of October 7th, it doesn't feel competitive in the industry, we'll call it, because there's an understanding that there's so much help that is needed,
Right.
that there's just enough to go around for everyone. And, we're better together.
I've had a few conversations on this podcast since October 7th with people, philanthropists focused on strengthening Israeli society. And I recall hearing that people are thinking about this as an area that needs tremendous investment beyond what's being done already. So I would definitely hear that there's an awareness, right? And in terms of your presentation, that we'll call it was the elephant in the room on some level pre-October 7th, it's not anymore. Do people understand kind of that this is like an immediate need, in the same way that they understand that buying drones for soldiers, and it's fine if it's not, like, there could be a hierarchy, and maybe that's number one. I'm just curious where you see that fitting in.
I don't know that I would say there's a priority. I think people who are dedicated to, and again, this goes back to the donor, right? It's where you want to invest. if you hear of a friend's son in the IDF unit and they need helmets, and that's where you feel the calling, then that's what you do. It doesn't mean that it's less or more important. I would definitely say that early on, I would say maybe the first 6 months, I feel awful just saying because it's been so long. There was more of an understanding about mental health needs being immediate. I would say that the biggest challenge for me and the organization is to convey to all of our supporters that mental health is not one and done. One check is not going to solve the problem, and we need supporters for long-term friendships, right? Because we know that we're still having Yom Kippur veterans coping with their PTSD symptoms that were triggered by October 7th, and prior to that, any other, security event in Israel. So we know the work is long, and the biggest dream is that Natal will have no work in the field ever. Wouldn't that be a dream come true for everyone?
Right.
But we know that's not the case right now. So I would say whatever the needs are, IDF, Natal, any other organization, they're going to be long term. This really, there's a lot of recovery to be done here.
Tell me, Natal has like a center, like I'm suffering from PTSD, could be related to this war, could be related to a previous trauma. What do I do? How do I access the resources of Natal?
So Natal has its headquarters in Tel Aviv. The gateway into the organization is a helpline that operates 24/7. The helpline is special. It has outgoing calls as well. It mimics therapy in the sense of a commitment. So you would call the helpline. If you're an IDF veteran, there's a dedicated helpline for that. And if you're a civilian, you call the helpline. The helplines are operated by volunteers that go through a very extensive 6-month training and is supervised by social workers. So you would call in, information intake in, and then the volunteer will say, can I call you back next week, Tuesday, 4 p.m.? And then you'd have that sort of relationship. Now, if you needed clinical services, you would be referred from the helpline into our clinical department, which offers one-on-one group therapy, specialized therapy, support groups, and so on. We also have a career development unit. So if you're coping with PTSD, but you're ready to go back into the workforce, the career development unit will help you find a mentor, and with the ability to quickly hop back into clinical or into the helpline should you need additional support. And on a routine basis, Natal does a lot of resiliency building pre-October 7th, especially around the Gaza envelope settlements. And now in businesses that are in Israel that are dealing with loss of manpower, people coming in and out, returning from reserve and having to go back again. So there's a big piece of community that is helpful in resiliency building that Natal focuses on. And as an organization, Natal is also very flexible and able to adapt from routine to emergency, back to routine, and so on, and make changes as we go, because really everything is unprecedented at this point.
Right. Well, you mentioned, for example, you're doing some work with Ukraine. What does that look like?
So Natal has a global department which exports its expertise. And with Ukraine, they needed support. So we sent a Natal team to really help. It's sometimes all you need is a professional set of eyes that are fresh, and they are, the ability to look in and say, we can support you here, and suggest models for treatments and so on, and really take the expertise the extra step.
Got it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about philanthropy. You've been in this space for many years now, and you've studied it from the bottom up. So I think you'd be very well positioned to kind of just share some insights in terms of your observations, in terms of working with different types of donors, in terms of uh, prioritizing. What are you seeing out there? What have you seen just over your years in the space, and what are you seeing particularly over the last few months in terms of what you're hearing from donors in terms of how they're viewing their philanthropy now?
Donors are extremely educated. They're becoming smarter. They're looking at the right places that review organization, GuideStar. They're really checking credibility, where the money is going, impact. So for me, with any conversation, it's going in, being educated about the topic, and knowing who you're having the conversation with. I think, the internet has made everything so accessible in the sense of you can learn so much about a person before you even have a conversation with them.
Right.
So I think it's finding a balance. I like to go in not knowing everything about that person. So, but I do want to know what interests them. If it's a foundation, I would want to see what their mission is to make sure that Natal's mission aligns with the organization. I think you can't waste anybody's time these days. So really, if it's not a match, save everybody the time and energy. However, many times, it's about the feeling that I have about something. And so sometimes it's worth pursuing, even though there's no alignment, but it could lead to other things. I would say with philanthropy these days, you have to really keep an open mind. I have seen a lot more younger, much, much, much younger donors connect with the organization. And these are young professionals who want to do something, who want to make an impact, who want to get involved. And for me, it's listening to them. I think they will set the trends of philanthropy. In the future, it was about to change before October 7th, meaning I saw a little less support for Israel from donors in the US. And following October 7th, there was a big flush, but now people are questioning where they're giving their money. And a lot of conversations that I'm having is that donors want to know that, yes, they want to support Israelis, but they also want to make sure that Israel has a thriving, successful society. And a lot of the donors are looking at Israel's economy as part of their philanthropy. It's fascinating to me, the involvement of, US citizens, for lack of better words, in the well-being of the state of Israel. I think it's fascinating relationship.
Interesting. What would you say is what's the just within the mechanics of a solicitation? What do you find to be the most difficult or challenging? I personally find the hardest part is getting in the room with the donor. Like if you're in the room, you're pretty much or usually going to be okay. I find like that pre-game work is the hardest. I'm curious what you find to be the most difficult.
I agree with you. Fundraising is not open a checkbook and write me a check. It's a relationship. So you have to build it. You're right. When you get in the room with a donor, they know your position, you know their position. It's a game that everybody knows their role, but the process of identifying a donor that you think would be interested in your organization, looking for an organic connection to that person, making that outreach, whether cold or by introduction. You're right. It's the setting up the relationship that is the most challenging.
Interesting. Any tips to how to navigate that, or just that's just part of the work? There's no secrets.
I think it's part of the work. It's definitely a big part of the work. It's always nice when you find a connection, and LinkedIn and all these social platforms have made it so easy and accessible, that it's really a big role of that initial outreach. I always say just do it. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You'll get a no, but you tried.
I don't do that. I mean, cold outreach I do all the time, or creating kind of like a framework where we kind of know each other. I actually haven't taken advantage so much of, let's say, mutual contacts on LinkedIn and asking people to make intros. Is that something that you've actually done effectively?
Yeah, and I think that's where the board also comes into play. That's why I say it's not only about money with the board. It's really leveraging their relationships and their professional skills, their personal skills. And I find that and I myself have made introductions to other colleagues in the industry with donors that I think would be interested in what they are doing.
Right.
So I think it's important to introduce when you have that ability, use it. It's going to come back when you need it. So I just believe in that.
Very nice. Okay, as we wind down, I like to usually ask my guests some personal questions. Um, I find we can always learn from each other's experiences and challenges and successes. First of all, I'd love to explore a little bit. You mentioned, I think, in the outset, some of your hobbies. I think I remember you're a runner or yogi. Like, talk a little bit just about. I don't know how you're. I think you said you're a mother. I don't know how many children you have, but I'd love to hear just a little bit how you kind of how do you manage? You mentioned how sometimes, of course, professional life intersects with personal life, but I'd love to hear a little bit just kind of your gestalt, your outlook on terms of how you manage and balance personal, professional, and things you do kind of to unwind and relax outside of a work context.
Um, I would say I run a tight ship at home, and my children will say that. I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old son and 11-year-old daughter. Um, it's all about schedule and routine and finding balance. And I prioritize, my workouts, because it's the time for me to think and process. The work day can be very intensive, one Zoom after another, and phone calls and meetings. And for me, I have to be present in every meeting. I can't be thinking about, the next task or something else. So I work very tightly with the schedule, a lot of planning, but also a lot of flexibility, because life happens and you have to adapt and change. I wake up early to make sure that I get that run in, that yoga class in, and I try to take a break from work when the kids come home from school to just hear about their day, take that extra 10-15 minutes, and then go back to work. And life is really about balancing. There are times where it is so stressful with work that I really just don't have time for anything else. And I have my husband who supports me and I support him, and we share the household tasks. But it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge that everybody faces, and I enjoy speaking to other people and hearing about their unique ways of handling.
Interesting. Do you work from home predominantly? Do you work in an office? Just
I predominantly work from home. AFN was always a remote office. I have a staff member from Denver and one from Maine. So we like to say that we're small and national. And it makes the in-person meetings that much more exciting.
Mhm. I would love to hear, actually, it's something I also kind of dance around with myself. I find that post-COVID, Zoom became very much a forum platform for meetings. That's how we're meeting right now. But I also always remind myself, I have found often that when I Zoom with whether it's a donor, a prospect, a colleague, and then I do have the opportunity to meet with them in person, it's a whole different experience and dynamic. I'm curious in the fundraising space, kind of, do you find that most of your meetings nowadays are via Zoom? Do you try to have meetings in person when you can? How do you approach that?
I definitely prefer in person versus a Zoom for
And at the same
sure.
time, there is a time efficiency issue. So it's even though like I'm willing to agree that in person is ideally almost always better, it may cost you tons of time to get back and forth that you could be using more productively. So it is a challenge. I'm curious how you think about it.
I agree. It's a huge challenge. Zoom is easy. It's accessible. You're home. You stay home. Sometimes Zoom meetings. So I'll say this: Zoom is wonderful because it gives me the opportunity to see my teammates in Israel. And that's something that was just not there pre-COVID
I
days.
agree.
And
Like
I've
I'm
worked.
talking like if it's like already a flight, and certainly a flight to a different country, then even though of course you'll touch base with them on occasion in person, that I get. But I'm actually more curious. But I agree with you. I'm curious, like more. You can go to somebody, in New York City, but you have to commute back and forth. Like I'm curious how you think about. You were getting there anyway. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I've met a lot of the donors that I've met started out on Zoom, and then we had an in-person meeting because they're not based in New York. And so Zoom did do something great to establish the relationship. There's something wonderful about being at the convenience of your home or your favorite coffee shop and having serious conversations, and then, hanging up and being able to think about it, and having your own time. I think that's a wonderful opportunity. It's a great business tool. And sometimes it works a lot better than in person. You're right. Sometimes for a lunch meeting to go in and commute for 2 hours doesn't make a lot of sense. But I also find that Zoom maybe made me a little lazy because it's so easy. So I always question myself, could this be done in person, or is Zoom the best solution for this instance? So I think it's just questioning when it may not be the right platform to use.
So when might it not be the right platform?
um I think after you establish a relationship with a person on Zoom, then it's taking it to the next level. And that's when, sometimes you have conversations with prospects and it's great on Zoom, but that in-person meeting is that meeting that will get them to take it to the next step. So, and it could be a donor, it could be a vendor that you want to work with. It could be a lot of things.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Maayan, tell me something as well. I'm asking last two questions. Something about you that people wouldn't guess. Something about you. It doesn't have to be something, deeply intimate, private, but there's something about you that, somebody's listened to this conversation. We've learned a lot about you and your work. Something that maybe I wouldn't guess about you that doesn't meet the eye.
I'm a great cook. I love cooking.
I
I
love
love
that.
cooking different ethnicity foods. My husband, for my birthday, got me an Indian chef that came to our house to teach us some cooking techniques. I think people don't know that about me, except for my close friends who make sure to get invited for meals.
Terrific.
But yeah, I do love to cook.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And final question, I'd love to hear, just from your perspective, what you consider to be a great accomplishment, a great success, something you feel really proud of, and something maybe a mistake or something, you or something that was painful or disappointing for you in your could be personal or professional experience.
Um, I'll go back to October 7th and say, and this sort of really wraps it up with where Natal is going.
Yeah.
October 7th was painful on, a personal level, of course, on a professional level. very much so. It's growing from that pain, you know, taking that pain. And to me, my goal is that every household in the US knows about Natal, right? I think people need to know what this organization is doing in Israel and the impact it can have on the world. And it's taking that pain and growing from it. And I think that's also the direction Natal will be going, is this idea of growth and hope and resilience. And because what happened happened, it's in the books, it's written, we can't undo that. So it's about what's next. And so that pain was, I'm still feeling it very much so, but I know that the growth that is coming out of it is where the focus should be going.
Okay, I appreciate that. On that note, Maayan, thank you so much for making the time. I found this conversation to be quite profound. I really commend you. It was really insightful and excellent. And I want to wish you continued hatzlacha, success in the crucial work that you are engaged in right now. And as you said, you know, we shouldn't need organizations like Natal, but the reality is that, in fact, we need them more than ever before. So I wish you continued success in what you're doing. Thank you.